How should I select a frame for High Plus?
When you're dealing with challenging prescriptions, the first and best thing that you can do is pick the perfect frame. Picking the perfect frame makes everything else substantially easier. Now, what is the perfect frame? So the answer is going to be a little bit different, whether it's a high plus prescription or a high minus prescription. Today we're going to talk about high plus. So your ideal shape for a frame is going to be round. The reason being is that when we make a high plus lens, that lens is a very steep curve, and anything that we can do to see how it's thin on the edge, that goes all the way around a circle. So if we can keep that thin edge matched up to the rim of the frame, you can have a very aesthetic pair of glasses. Now what happens though is the way that you do that is you need the frame PD. Now the frame PD is your distance between your geometric centers. You can have the frame PD as close as possible to the patient PD. So if that's, my art is suspect, I apologize. So if you have the frame PD equal to or very close to the patient PD, that allows you to center the lenses pretty much perfectly in the frame. Now if you don't do that, so say that the patient's eyes are in here, now what we need to do is cut the lens and make it thicker. So we need to cut that lens. So we need to make the lens thicker and then cut it here and here. So what's going to happen is if you force a patient with a narrow PD into a too large of a frame, we need to put the center, we need to move the center in. So what that requires is a thicker lens, and it's going to be very thick in the nasal of the frame. Now the same thing we're talking about the circle shape is if you do any shape but circle, you're going to expose the thickness of the lens. So if we were to do an oval, what would happen is it would stay thin here and here, but it would be thick here and here. The other thing is if you do something with a sharp shape, we need to make the lens thicker so that we can make the edge go all the way out to this shape. So what happens is everywhere that's not there would end up being thicker. So ideally for a high plus, you're going to want to pick a frame that is as round as possible and that the patient PD is as close as possible to the frame PD.
What design considerations are there with High Plus?
There's a lot of different lenses available out there. When you're dealing with a high plus script, one of the more important considerations is asphericity. So when I say asphericity, what that means is if you take a lens and say it's a flat lens and my eyeball is here, what happens is if I look straight ahead, that's a fairly clear image. But as I look out to the side, the further that I get, what happens is a thing called oblique astigmatism. And what that does is warps the image and makes the image not as true as when you're looking straight ahead. So when we do an aspheric lens is designed to optimize for this oblique astigmatism, and then we can make the lens a little bit flatter and thinner. Now, aspheric is a very interesting thing, but there is some things that we want to be cognizant of when we're selecting a design. So when we make the lens, we want the back surface to be concave in some way. Because if we do it flat or convex even, while you can potentially make a lens thinner, you introduce the opportunity for more of the oblique astigmatism. So if we do a lens with a slight concave and a freeform aspheric design, you can really optimize the shape to minimize oblique astigmatism. Now, what can be kind of addictive, and we hear this a lot, is be like, I don't care, make it as thin as you possibly can. And when we make it like this, so you have the front lens, we do something like this, and it makes the lens, like, other than looking like a UFO or a seagull, what happens is you reintroduce this idea of the oblique astigmatism, because here you're actually, your eye is going opposite the angle of the lens and you can't see well through it. So we can make very aesthetic lenses that will look good in the lensometer, but the patient can't really use them. And I think that it's one of the unspoken rules of eyeglasses that eyeglasses should be usable by the patient.
What should I avoid for high plus prescriptions?
There's a few things you can do to make sure that you make the glasses as aesthetically appealing as possible. One thing, and this is an optical thing, is to don't do polished edges. Polished edges, if you've ever seen like how fiber optics work, they're these magical little things that they shoot light through. But basically what's happening in a fiber optic is the light is bouncing off and inside this tube. And when you polish the edges of a lens, effectively you're creating a tube for light to bounce in and around. So it adds extra unnecessary glare when you have polished edges. The other thing about the frame selection, and we talked about the frame shape selection, but there's also the frame design. So there's a couple of things, of types of frames, that if you order this type of frame, we need to manufacture the lenses thicker and the glasses just don't come out looking quite as good. So one of them is nylon rimless. So when we make a nylon rimless lens, we have to make it thicker so that we can put a groove in the lens that the nylon sits in. So to make that, to make the lens thick enough to accommodate that groove, we need to make the entire lens thicker. The other scenario where we would need to make a lens thicker is on a drill mount lens. So on a drill mount lens, where we might be able to make what we call a knife edge on a standard rim frame, with a drill mount, we would need to make the edge closer to like 2 millimeters. So when we make that thicker edge, once again, that lens thickness needs to carry throughout the lens. So while that frame might look really cool with plano lenses in it, if you have a prescription of a +4, a +5, a +6, or beyond, I would stay away from these particular frame styles.
Are wrap frames a good option for high plus?
It is tempting when you see the cool looking wrap frames that go all around the face, that you might want your prescription in those. Now, what I had said originally with the frame PD versus the patient PD, so you want the eyes and the centers of the lens very closely aligned. When you have a wrap frame, those lenses end up very large and the centers end up very far in. So what happens is similar to what we need to do with the rimless frames and the drill mount frames, is we need to make the lens this big so that we can make it so that you can see through it. So if you think of how, if we're making a lens that big, we need to make it like that thick so that you can fit it into this frame. The other challenge is that the way that these lenses are designed a lot of the time, you might have an issue with the back of the lens coming in towards your face and hitting your eyelashes. So there's numerous reasons to not do the full wrap frame, but there are some neat modifiers. For instance, there's frames that have an RX rim. So rather than having the entire lens, what you would have is a rim inside the lens that then allows it to be a higher plus and make the higher plus look a little bit better.